Something interesting that we think about, of course, is we were talking about the role of patents in this area in cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency and edge computing were our focus areas for today. But more generically, when we think about patent data, it's kind of fun to see what we can mine from there and what assets lie there that can be used. Even if some of these early stage companies don't make it, there are patent assets in the ground that may be available for anyone to acquire, for anyone to use. So it's not just the large players like IBM or Bank of America that are investing in the cryptocurrency sector for IP, but let's explore that a little bit. Good to remember also that in every sector, and for most companies, they're only using 25% or less of their patent portfolio. Most patents are not actually used commercially, at least not by the applicant or the initial inventor. There's a lot of research that came out in the early 2000s that showed that most large companies were using only 10 to 15%. Most invention and innovation coming out of research organizations and tech transfer, most of it, 95% or more, was not being used to make commercial impact. And yet there's a lot of data, there's a lot of information there. Remember, since every patent represents an inventive solution to a problem, that leaves a lot of information on the table to take off and to implement and to improve on. One of the reasons that we look at market data and patent data together is that it's that combination that really gives us insight. So when we think about what's happening with patent data, it's not a snapshot, it's not landscape, if you will, but particularly with MagicNumber, we think of it like weather. It's changing every single week. How many of you have looked at your weather app today? Everybody has. Come on, more than once. And yet we're not looking at how investment trends are changing as they occur, as they transform week in and week out. Because also of the American Vents Act, or AIA, as we mentioned earlier, there's a race to file. You have to be the first to file to get your stake in the ground for patents, to have priority. And yet also, when we think about it, you have to file before there's public use. So even as an early stage, high innovation company, you've got to make filings before you've got public use, or you may be creating a bar to your own patenting. So what does that mean? That means patent data itself is a leading indicator over the market, over commercial activity. So you'll see it first in the patent realm, and then it will materialize later. Sometimes it takes a lot longer. For those of you who have not participated in the patent system, you may not know that it often takes more than 2 years from the time you file before you ever have a response from the US Patent and Trademark Office, from the examiner. There are some mechanisms we like to refer to as fast track or track 1 expedited exam that can get you to the front of the line to move more quickly. And yet, even still, the innovation is happening faster. So looking at patent data and patent data trends can help you see what's happening with competition, with the larger players in the market. And by the way, the smaller companies tend to file first and faster. There's a lot of inertia from larger companies in moving forward with patent applications. Somewhat surprisingly, as I mentioned earlier, there's still a misconception that software is not patentable. And yet let's talk about these areas, cryptocurrency and edge computing, where there are a lot of software patents that are being applied for and that are being issued. Let's take on crypto for a second, first of all, because we've just been talking about that. There's been over 600% growth in the last 5 years in the cryptocurrency sector regarding patents. And it's not just one type of application. It's not only relating to the currency itself, but digital computing, industrial areas, from gaming to healthcare to voting, as we heard earlier. There's some voting patent applications, and also in finance. Network-based communication with it, payment architectures, and of course, security. Let's talk a little bit about who we're seeing as being active in this sector. Interestingly, in cryptocurrency, in the top 10 patent owners in the space, the number 3 is the independent inventor. It's individuals who start small businesses, who start innovation-based companies. That means there's a lot of opportunity for aggregation, for licensing and collaboration. A lot of independent inventors just don't have the wherewithal, don't have the understanding necessarily to start a business. We're in a specialization economy, which means it should be possible to then secure your invention, your idea as an asset with patenting, and then transfer that freely to someone else. It's property. That's a great way to make commercial impact, just by licensing or selling. Let's talk about the big boys who are here, though. IBM is now the number 1. They have recently displaced Bank of America as the number 1 patent owner in this space. That is, patents applied for and patents pending. Bank of America, number 2. Number 3, independent inventors. Number 4, MasterCard in the cryptocurrency sector. PayPal, Alibaba Holdings, Visa, Intel, Enchain, and rounding out the top 10 is the Toronto Dominion Bank. Couple surprises there, and perhaps a couple not. But as we look at, since 2009, that Bitcoin white paper, 11 years, as we heard earlier, we've seen the cryptocurrency values rise. It's enabled decentralized global trade, and it's also endured market fluctuations, theft, and even perhaps some illegal or illicit transactions, although that's a really small percent of, as we've heard. Blockchain-based technologies have an even greater interest today for investors than at the beginning. And what we've seen from the patent activity, as I mentioned, as an emergent sector, its increases over 600% in the last 5 years. And already in 2019, we're expecting to see that increase. How many of you went to CES recently? A number of you. One of the things about the Consumer Electronics Show, it's one of the first early places to see technologies before they're commercialized, and yet, of course, patenting before that. Some of the top activities or demos that we saw at CES included autonomous vehicles, IoT, or Internet of Things related devices and sensors, and AI, artificial intelligence. The edge computing sector crosses over all of those. As we also know from cryptocurrency and from the blockchain, there's a lot of computing resources that are required for implementation. We've seen a trend go from everyone had data stored on their personal devices locally to every bit of data moving to the cloud. And yet, what do we see now as a trend? Data's moving back away from the cloud. The latency issue is so significant that if you're really going to have autonomous vehicles, if you're going to be having Internet of Things analysis of data, you're going to have to be computing at the edge or moving it there. And we're seeing that in the patent sector. The patent application increases and issued patents in the edge computing sector is up over 300% in the last 5 years. These are 2 of the top growth areas, the cryptocurrency and edge computing, across all of the areas of patenting. Let's pick on a recent company, just to give you some really hard dollar values for companies. In edge computing, not in the top 10, but in the top 15, there's a company called Vapor.io. You've heard of it, perhaps. Vapor.io just announced last week its Series C round for $90 million, led by Berkshire and Crown Castle. They've raised $100 million all told, but this last round, 90. They announced last October a kinetic edge exchange platform that employs software to allow users to determine how they allocate bandwidth. within a particular area. They have a strong patent portfolio that's at the heart of their valuation. If we look at edge deployed data centers, this is going to become more and more common. Even in my hometown and home state in North Carolina, there's a young company called EdgeX that has deployed its own technology for edge processing and applying it for traffic management, smart streetlights, among other things. Obviously, if you're driving an autonomous vehicle or semi-autonomous vehicle, because you're not driving autonomous, although Tesla likes to claim that, there's a lot of data, over 1 terabyte per day from each autonomous vehicle. The latency of having to upload that when you're charging when you get home means that that information isn't as useful. It would be more useful if it's possible to have it transmitted, communicated, and analyzed securely at the edge at each intersection. Interesting application. Let's go through some of the top companies in the edge computing sector for patents and investment. Unlike the cryptocurrency sector, independent inventors do not round out the top 10 at all. They don't show. It's just the big guys. Cisco, Itron, IBM, Microsoft, Huawei, Red Hat, Verizon, and Intel are among our top 10 players. It's kind of interesting, and it might seem intimidating unless we remember there's always movement. There's always improvement. One of the reasons patent data is so important is that you can improve upon that information. You can come up with the next invention when you consider what has worked and what's not worked. You can actually pretty quickly become a near expert in any field like edge computing just by studying the patent data. It's a quick way to get that edge computing MBA, if you will. So I would like to invite you to continue this conversation about patent data, about these two areas, edge computing, about cryptocurrency, as we move out of this meeting, this DCIP forum today, and into our reception. And also going forward, as we mentioned, it's a continual conversation that we need to be having with each other to secure unity so that we can communicate with legislative stakeholders to help move change, to ensure that software patents continue to be valuable and viable, to ensure that we continue to have access for everyone, not just to the cryptocurrency and blockchain sectors, but to edge computing and every sector through the Patent Office. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for your questions.